Crying again? What in the world is wrong with you? The voice cracked through the stale air like a whip. Customers flinched. A few looked up from their carts, their curiosity quickly dissolving into a desire to be anywhere else. Behind checkout lane 4, Clara Evans stood frozen, her hands still hovering above the peas, her eyes wide with a familiar, burning embarrassment. She didn't answer. She just swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat and whispered, "Sorry, Mr. Thorne. I'm fine." Marcus Thorne, broad-shouldered, red-faced, and smelling of stale coffee and ego, slammed his clipboard down on the counter. The sound was sharp, violent. A pen rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. "I don't pay people to fall apart during their shift," he growled, his voice loud enough for the entire front end to hear. "You got problems, handle them on your own time. You want to cry? Go stock tissues in aisle 9. Clara blinked fast, but it was too late. A single, hot tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, forcing a fragile smile for the elderly woman waiting patiently with 2 cans of soup and a loaf of bread. Her voice trembled, but she used it anyway. "Hi there," she managed. "Did you find everything okay today?" Marcus grunted and stormed off, his heavy boots pounding toward the back office, leaving a wake of chilled silence behind him. Have you ever felt invisible, even when you were standing in plain sight? Have you ever had a harsh word shatter you into 1,000 pieces, only to be forced to gather them all up again, right there on the spot, just to keep going? This story begins in a moment just like that, at a checkout lane in a grocery store, where human dignity was being sold for cheaper than a can of soup. And 2 aisles away, Arthur Vance had seen enough. The man he used to be, the scrappy dreamer who started Summit Fair from a corner stall with a handful of cash and a boundless belief in people, would have marched straight to the front and fired Marcus on the spot. But that's not who Arthur was now. Now he was the CEO, the founder, the face on the company brochure, the one who signed the checks and approved expansions from coast to coast. Somewhere along the line, he'd started trusting spreadsheets more than he trusted people. And yet, none of those colorful charts ever captured what he was seeing right now. A good person holding back tears under flickering fluorescent lights, trying to act like being humiliated in front of strangers was just another part of the job. It had arrived in a plain white envelope, tucked between glossy marketing proposals and quarterly reports. There was no return address. The handwriting inside was rushed, looped, and full of a quiet urgency. It was just 4 sentences. "Mr. Vance," it began, "if you care about your people, come see store number 14 in Greenville. Come see it before there's nothing left to see. This store is drowning. Not from theft, but from fear." Arthur had read it twice. His first instinct was to dismiss it. A disgruntled employee, perhaps. He passed it to his regional management team during their weekly video call. They had laughed it off. Gen Z whining again, one of them had said with a smirk, probably mad about not getting a Saturday off. They assured him that store 14's numbers were solid. Efficiency was up. Overtime was down. On paper, it was a model of success. Arthur, trusting the data his system was built on, had let it go. But the letter didn't let him go. It sat in his briefcase, a silent, nagging whisper. This store is drowning. He remembered the early days, 30 years ago. He remembered starting Summit Fair with 6 crates of produce and a folding table outside a gas station. Back then, it was just him and a promise that anyone who worked beside him would be treated with respect, that they would be seen, heard, and valued. He used to know every name on the payroll. He used to bring sandwiches to the night crew and sit with them in the quiet hours just to hear how their shifts went, how their families were, what their dreams were. Well, how that changed. When did the names on the payroll become headcount numbers? When did the stories from the break room get replaced by sterile profit and loss statements? He looked at the charts his team sent him. Colorful, efficient, and full of bold-faced lies disguised as data. He had approved them. He had rewarded the efficiency they represented. So he booked a flight. He didn't tell his executive team. He didn't tell regional management. He rented an anonymous sedan at the airport and drove toward Greenville, not as a CEO on an inspection tour, but as a man looking for an answer to a question he was afraid to ask. Had he built an empire that had lost its soul? He arrived as the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He parked at the far end of the lot, a place that offered a clear view of the employee exit. He just watched. He watched as employees trickled out, some in pairs, but most alone, their shoulders hunched under the weight of the day. Then Claire Evans came out. He recognized her from the employee file, a 5-year veteran. She moved toward an old Ford sedan, its burgundy paint faded, a plastic bag taped over one of the side mirrors where glass used to be. She stopped, opened her wallet, and looked inside. Arthur could see, even from a distance, that there was nothing but a few coins and a receipt. And then she dropped into a crouch next to the rear tire. Her hands covered her face, and her shoulders began to tremble with silent, racking sobs. It was a private grief, made public in the lonely expanse of a cracked asphalt parking lot. Arthur stayed in his seat. He didn't want to be seen. Not yet, because what he was witnessing wasn't just about one bad manager. This wasn't just poor supervision. This was rot, quiet, slow, and dangerous. He whispered the words of the letter back to himself. This store is drowning. He had built this place. Every store bore a name that was meant to mean something. Clean aisles, respectful staff, a warmth in every corner. He built this empire, but he no longer recognized it. And that night, in the driver's seat of a rented car, Arthur Vance realized he wasn't there to inspect a store. He was there to find the soul he himself had lost. The next morning, he showed up at store number 14. He wasn't wearing a blazer or expensive business shoes, but simple khakis and a dark blue Summit Fair polo shirt. On his chest, a temporary visitor badge read, Al, temporary staff. He passed Marcus in the break room. Marcus, sipping from a mug that ironically read, World's Best Boss, didn't even look up. Perfect. Arthur smiled grimly to himself. Time to go to work. Al, dry goods, aisle 3. Stack those rice bags tighter. It looks sloppy. The order came from a young woman no older than 20, chewing gum and tapping a pen against a clipboard. Arthur gave a polite nod and wheeled his cart toward the aisle without a word. No one recognized him. No one cared. He was just another temporary body, a warm placeholder in a store that had forgotten how to breathe. He'd only been on the floor for 20 minutes, and already the cracks in the foundation were clearer than any report he'd ever read. Half-stock shelves had sale labels that expired a week ago. Employees moved with the caution of soldiers in hostile territory. No one made eye contact. No one laughed. That was the most jarring part, the silence. He had designed this chain to feel like a community, like family. But this was survival. As Arthur crouched to realign the rice bags, he heard someone approach. Soft steps, nervous energy. You the new guy, huh? He looked up to see a young man with shaggy brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His name tag read Leo. Yeah, Arthur replied, wiping his hands on his pants. Name's Al. Leo offered a tight, fleeting smile. Welcome to the quietest store in Alabama. Arthur chuckled softly. It's that bad, huh? Leo lowered his voice, glancing around as if the shelves themselves had ears. It didn't used to be. Last year, this place had music teamwork. Now, it's like a funeral home with fluorescent lights. What changed? Arthur asked, his tone casual. Leo hesitated, his eyes darting toward the front of the store. Marcus, mostly. He came in, said we needed to tighten operations. Started cutting hours, shuffling shifts without warning. If you ask questions, you get fewer hours the next week. If you speak up for someone, you get written up. Arthur's chest tightened. He decided to push just a little. That cashier up front. Clara. She okay? Leo's eyes darkened with a sadness that seemed too old for his face. Clara's probably the kindest person here. She trains every new hire, picks up the shifts no one wants. But, he trailed off, looking over his shoulder again. Her kid's sick. Asthma. It gets bad sometimes. She had to miss 2 nights last month because he was in the ER. He shook his head, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Marcus cut her schedule in half after that. Said she's unreliable. Arthur stood there, silent, gripping the edge of the metal cart tighter. Leo added a final, chilling observation. She doesn't complain, though. Just keeps showing up, you know? Quietly breaking. Those two words, quietly breaking, hit Arthur harder than any profit and loss statement ever could. The day moved slowly. As he worked, he took mental notes. He saw Sarah in frozen foods, her eyes glassy with exhaustion as she checked expiry dates. He saw David in dairy, trying to hide a noticeable limp as he lifted heavy crates of milk. He overheard two teenage employees arguing in whispers about being scheduled for back-to-back overnight shifts during their school exams. But no one talked aloud. That was the rule now. Speak. Every face, every downcast glance, was a line in a report that no spreadsheet could ever contain. Arthur was reading a story not written in ink, but in exhaustion, in fear, and in the crushing weight of dignified silence. During his lunch break, Arthur found an empty vending machine room at the back of the store. The air was stale, the silence broken only by the low hum of the coolers. He bought a granola bar he didn't want and leaned against the far wall, closing his eyes. He remembered a time when he knew every name, every story. When had he become so distant? He pulled the folded letter from his pocket and read it again. For sentences in loopy, rushed handwriting. This store is drowning, not from theft, but from fear. I thought you should know. Before someone sinks for good. He had kept it in his jacket pocket ever since, a silent challenge, a guilt trip, a call to arms. He didn't realize someone had entered the room until he heard muffled sobs. He turned his head slightly. There, behind a stack of vending machines, barely visible, someone sat on the floor, curled into a small ball. It was Clara. Her face was buried in her hands, her voice ragged and broken between hiccups. I can't do this anymore, she whispered to herself, the words tearing from her throat. I've tried. I come in every day. I smile. I even covered for Marcus's girlfriend when she no-showed, and now I'm down to 10 hours a week. 10 hours. I can't feed my kid with that. I can't even pay for gas to get here. Silence. Then another voice, young, male, and quiet. Marcus is coming after me, too. It was Leo. He was sitting on the floor a few feet away from her, his own shoulders slumped in defeat. He told me if I call out sick again, he'll cut me down to weekends only. Clara's voice came through clenched teeth, raw with a pain that went beyond sadness into pure anguish. I didn't call out sick, Leo. My son had an asthma attack. He was turning blue. I called. I begged. I told him I could come in late. And he said I was making excuses. Arthur didn't move. He couldn't. He barely breathed. Every word they spoke, every broken sob, stabbed deeper than any boardroom criticism ever had. He could feel it then, that heavy, invisible chain of silent suffering, pulling his store, his people, into darkness. This wasn't a business problem. This was a moral crisis. He was the one who signed the performance bonuses for managers like Marcus. He was the one who rewarded the numbers on the page, blind to the human cost required to achieve them. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his signature had helped forge the very chains that were now crushing the people in this room. If you've ever felt that kind of desperation, or if you've ever seen it in someone else's eyes, just take a moment to acknowledge that feeling. It's a quiet reminder of our shared humanity, of the burdens we all carry that often go unseen. The quiet sobs in the room eventually faded. Arthur waited until he heard them both leave before he moved. That night, he didn't drive back to the corporate condo he'd booked on the other side of town. Instead, he checked into a cheap motel across the street from Summit Fair. The carpet was dingy, the wallpaper was peeling, and a slow ceiling fan ticked like a broken clock. He laid out a notebook on the small desk and began to write. Names: Clara, Leo, Sarah, David, one by one. Next to each name, he noted every detail he could recall. Shifts, complaints, silent glances, physical signs of fatigue. He added a small star next to Clara's name and circled it twice. She was the heart of this store, and they had tried to erase her. He didn't sleep. He just sat by the window, watching the faint glow of the Summit Fair sign, a monument to a promise he had broken. The store was half awake, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and cleaning chemicals. The tension, that low hum of quiet misery, was everywhere. Arthur felt it in the way cashiers kept their heads low, in the way stockers flinched whenever Marcus's heavy boots echoed behind them. He spent the morning working, but his mind was elsewhere. He spoke with Sarah in the frozen aisle, who confirmed she was on her 5th consecutive overnight shift, forced to miss her son's high school games. "You don't get to cherry-pick schedules," Marcus had told her. He saw David wince as he lifted a box, his limp more pronounced than the day before. Later that afternoon, during the shift transition, Arthur found his chance. Marcus had stepped out for a smoke, and the assistant manager had gone home early with a migraine. Under the guise of checking the backstock list for paper towels, Arthur slipped quietly into the side office. The room smelled of cheap air freshener and spilled energy drinks. He sat at the desk, the cheap office chair groaning under his weight, and pulled the keyboard toward him. He still had an old, admin-level login, an emergency credential buried deep within a technical account he hadn't used in years. Now his fingers moved with practiced ease. The screen flickered to life. He navigated to the scheduling and employee database. He typed, "Evans Clara." The page loaded. Week 1, 31 hours. Week 2, 26 hours. Week 3, 17 hours. This week, 9 hours. Next week, unassigned. Internal note, emotional, unreliable. Childcare issues. Arthur stared at the screen, a hot pulse rising in his throat. He typed in other names. Leo West. Assigned 19 hours, mostly night shifts. Internal note, talks too much, low compliance. Sarah Graham. 5 consecutive graveyard shifts. Internal note, pushy, requests too many accommodations. He shifted to another tab, one that tracked managerial actions. He found it. Marcus hadn't just been careless. He had been strategic, ruthless. He was systematically bleeding hours from the vulnerable, from anyone who dared to have a life outside the store walls. But why? The final click revealed the answer. Marcus had received 5 consecutive efficiency improvement bonuses. The system showed the requests were auto-routed to corporate for approval, based on low staffing numbers and reduced overtime. And at the end of that digital signature trail, clear as day, was his own name, approved, A. Vance. Marcus was being rewarded for his cruelty, rewarded for turning schedules into weapons, for keeping expenses low by breaking the backs and spirits of his employees. Arthur's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded letter. Before there's nothing left to see. Now he saw it all. Just as he was logging out, the office door clicked open. Arthur spun in the chair, his heart racing. It was Clara. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide with alarm. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought." Arthur smiled gently, standing up. "Just checking the paper towel order," he said, his voice calm. She hesitated. "You knew, right?" "Al." He nodded. She gave a faint, tired smile, then lowered her gaze. "Be careful around Marcus," she whispered. "He doesn't like people in here." He wanted to tell her everything right then. He wanted to tell her the weight wasn't hers to carry alone. But not yet. Not here. At 9:10 p.m., after the store had cleared out, Marcus returned to the office to finalize his reports. He opened the door to find Arthur standing at the desk, for printed pages in hand, his eyes steady. Marcus blinked, his face turning from confusion to caution. "You shouldn't be in here." Arthur said nothing. He simply held up the papers. "What's that?" Marcus scoffed, trying to maintain his authority. "Proof," Arthur said softly, "of everything you've been doing." "What are you talking about?" "I run this place efficiently. You think you're some kind of hero, temp, poking around on the computers?" Arthur stepped forward, his presence filling the small room. "You've used this system to cut lives apart. Not just hours. Lives. You turned their schedules into threats." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What's your deal, man? You're just a temp. Stay in your lane." Arthur stared at him, his voice now calm and cold as ice. "I built this lane." There was a beat of profound silence. Marcus blinked, the words not computing. Arthur reached up and slowly pulled off his Al name tag, dropping it onto the desk. "Arthur Vance. Founder. CEO." Marcus's mouth parted slightly, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. "You're... No, that's not. And I've seen enough," Arthur continued, stepping closer. Marcus staggered back. Wait, there's got to be a mistake here. Look, I was just following metrics. Cutting hours is policy." "No." Arthur snapped, his voice sharp for the first time. Cutting hours for retaliation is abuse. Padding your bonuses is fraud. This isn't management. This is manipulation. But corporate approved. Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. They approved the numbers you fed them. Arthur cut in. I know. I signed off on them. His voice dropping to a whisper. Marcus looked around, panicked. Look, I was just trying to meet the targets. That's what you people want. I wanted leadership, Arthur said, the finality in his tone unmistakable. You gave me fear. He stepped aside and opened the office door. Hand over your keys. Rick didn't move. You're done, Arthur said. Reluctantly, Marcus reached into his pocket and dropped the key ring into Arthur's outstretched hand. The metal clinked in the empty office, a sound as final as a gavel. Leave, Arthur commanded. Marcus turned and retreated down the hall, his footsteps fading away. The break room had never been this full. Folding chairs were pulled from storage. Plastic crates were flipped upside down to serve as seats. Employees stood along the walls, their arms crossed, their faces a mixture of caution, curiosity, and fear. The air was thick with questions. Arthur stood at the front of the room, the keys for Marcus still clutched in his left hand. He looked across the faces of his staff, some young, some worn by years on their feet, some visibly exhausted. These were not numbers on a chart. They were his people, and he had failed them. My name, he began, his voice steady and clear, is Arthur Vance. A small ripple moved through the room. Murmurs. Leo straightened up. Sarah blinked. Clara, standing near the door, went pale. Arthur nodded slowly. I'm the founder of Summit Fair. Some of you may know the story, some of you may not. I started this company 30 years ago with 6 crates of produce and a folding table. Back then, it was just me and a promise that no one who worked beside me would ever be treated like they didn't matter. He let the words hang in the air, heavy with memory and shame. But somewhere along the way, I got lost. I became the man who read quarterly summaries instead of faces, who approved schedules without seeing the lives behind them. And because of that, I didn't see what was happening here. I didn't see what Marcus Thorne turned this place into. He held up the printed shift logs, the papers thick with his own red ink and annotations. I saw the documents, the schedules manipulated to punish, the hours used as weapons, the bonuses extracted from your sacrifices. And I saw the silence you have been living in. Jalen swallowed hard. Someone near the back exhaled, a shaky, audible sigh. I can't undo what's already been done, Arthur continued, his voice softer now. But I can begin by doing something that should have happened a long time ago. He turned toward the front row, where Clara now sat, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if shielding herself. Clara Evans, Arthur said, his voice firm but kind. I would like you to accept the position of assistant manager at this store, effective immediately, with full authority. A stunned silence fell over the room. Clara didn't move. A few people turned to look at her. Leo looked like he'd stopped breathing altogether. Clara stared at Arthur, confusion swimming in her tired eyes. Me? He nodded. You? She shook her head slowly, her voice a whisper. I've been written up. Marcus said I was unstable, that I couldn't be trusted to lead. Arthur stepped closer, his tone gentle. You came to work every day. You trained new staff, covered for others, smiled through your tears, and gave customers kindness even when this job gave you nothing back. You stood your ground without losing your humanity. That's not weakness, Clara. That is leadership. Clara looked around the room, as if to see if this moment was real. What she saw staring back at her was not pity, but quiet relief. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for too long. If you believe in me, she said quietly, I'll try. Arthur smiled, the weariness in his shoulders softening for the first time in days. Don't try, Clara. Lead. He turned back to the others. As of tonight, this store is under review. We'll be restoring hours, restructuring shifts, and auditing every policy Marcus ever touched. But more than that, he paused, scanning the room, we're restoring dignity. Leo raised his hand, hesitating, then spoke the question on everyone's mind. What happens when you leave? What if things just go back to the way they were? They won't. Arthur answered without missing a beat. Because I'm not leaving until we make sure they don't. And more importantly, because I'm not the only one leading anymore. He looked to Clara. You won't be alone. There was a silence. Then, slowly, one clap. It came from Sarah. Then David joined in. Soon, the whole room was applauding. Not loudly, but with a quiet, respectful acknowledgement that said, "We see you. We're with you." Later that night, long after the meeting, Clara walked into the manager's office. The air still faintly smelled of Marcus's cologne. She sat down in the black leather chair that had, for years, been the seat of fear. It was hers now. She powered on the computer, opened the scheduling system, and clicked Create New. A blank sheet. A new beginning. She began to type. Prioritize single parents for consistent morning shifts. No one works more than 3 consecutive overnights. If someone requests an adjustment for family or health needs, we listen and respect it. No retaliation. Ever. She leaned back, then grabbed a blank sheet of paper and a marker. In thick black strokes, she wrote, "Schedules exist to support people, not to punish them." She taped it to the wall above the desk. It wasn't just an office anymore. It was a promise. The story of store number 14 doesn't end with a bad manager being fired. It truly begins when a good person is finally given the chance to lead. The change didn't come from a new policy printed in a corporate manual. It came from a simple, human decision, the decision to listen. In our world, in our own workplaces and communities, how many store number 14s exist in silence? How many Claras are quietly breaking at their desks or checkout lanes? How many Leos feel their potential is being overlooked? This story teaches us a profound and valuable lesson. True leadership isn't about the power you hold. It's about the attention you pay. It's the ability to see the human being behind the employee, to hear the story behind the silence, and to recognize that the softest skills, empathy, kindness, and decency, are in fact the greatest strengths of all. We have the power to change the culture around us, not always through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of recognition and respect. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of kindness and dignity in our everyday lives, please give this video a like. It helps stories like this reach more people who may need to hear it. And to join us for more stories that explore the heart of the human experience, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.